Howdy, folks. This update's a little off schedule, and I debated making this one or not, but with the kind of dynamic environment around the budget right now and some of what we see higher up in the government, this seemed like a good one to do. So, folks may know earlier this week, the commissioners, we had a meeting around the budget, and that there was still a remaining deficit in it that had come up because of changes. Basically, some numbers changed, some projected expenses changed, revenues, and we had to do another update to it, and we thought we had it. That was Wednesday, I believe we had that meeting. It's been a busy week, but as of yesterday afternoon, that has shifted on us again. In part, some of the money we were planning to use, we've got to look at how we can use it, but that's something within our control. Something outside of our control came down from the federal government and the state government yesterday. And as it was explained to me, it relates to our marine law enforcement. So our maritime, we're surrounded by water and lakes and ocean. We've got some maritime law enforcement we do, and that's where rescue comes into play as well. So what happened? A contract that goes out to the states from the federal government has criteria in it to receive the federal funding that was then passed through to agencies to run their maritime law enforcement program. And that's, for those that keep track of this, but it's foreign to them, that would be a restricted fund. So that's money dedicated to the Marine Patrol, can't be spent on anything else. We can't spend it on patrol deputies on the land. That's where that money goes. And there's some other factors in there as well, which is why it impacts our budget. So what happened? The agreement came out, and the state, as is my understanding, refused to sign it. There was a clause unspecified about following all executive orders. Now, when it's unspecified, the ones that are still making it through the courts, up through the Supreme Court even, those ones are still being determined if they're lawful orders. So when it says, when there's no specification and it just says you have to follow all of them, I can see why they had some issues. Maybe they could have done something with that, I don't know. And there was a portion that required the release of some records or all records. I don't know what the concern was there. Maybe it was data security. That would make sense. The nutshell of it, though, is the state didn't receive the money. And because of that, Coos County will be short another $60,000 plus per year for this year and next year. So another hole in the budget. That's the federal side. The state side, the state's response was a problem as well. The initial discussion that I heard about was that the state was looking at cutting money out of the smaller programs and only funding the 10 largest counties, which is not a surprise to me, but it's a bad thing to do, to put it mildly. What they settled for instead is a 30% cut across all programs throughout the state. But what that doesn't affect is it still means smaller programs won't be able to sustain necessarily. We don't know yet if ours will, but for smaller counties than us even, which there's a lot of counties that are smaller than Coos, there are 2 counties that are smaller than Lakeside in population. But what will happen to them is if they close their programs, the total funding is going to go back to the state, which I would expect them to spend on the larger counties anyway. It just sounds better the way they did it this time instead of what they originally proposed. So, because of that, we're going to have more discussions around the budget, obviously. So that just creates more uncertainty. It's not good for staff because they don't know either. we've got to keep going over it, but that's our job. We're supposed to take care of the people under us, and yeah, these situations don't help us with that. I generally don't talk about partisan stuff much because people get bogged down in that, and at the folks we have at the local level aren't, in my opinion, very well represented by the federal level parties. As examples, you've got, well, I'll leave that alone, but that's just my opinion. When I look at the federal level politics, I see locally we have parties with opinions, but they're also more pragmatic. They'll vote for people, even if they're not in the party, if they're a good candidate. They are more of a meritocracy. Whereas at the higher levels of partisan politics, it's all about the letter next to the name. And that's a problem for me. So I'm going to give a heads up on what I think the two spins will be, because this will be framed differently by each party, and it needs to be understood better than how it's framed. So I'm thinking out of the federal side, majority Republican, it's going to be framed as the state refused to comply with these different orders. They chose not to do this, and because of their decision not to do that, the funding isn't going to come in, which you can make sense of that if that's where you're looking. From the Democrat side at our state government, I am expecting to see something that's a little more nuanced. Obviously, they can argue that when the executive order is in court, it's not been determined to be lawful. So to just say you have to follow every order, even when you're in the military, you don't have to follow every order if it's an unlawful order. There's going to be consequences in a very awkward process, but even in that context, you are expected to follow the law when you've got orders from superior officers. And in this case, that's what the state's going to say they're doing, is something similar to that, but probably without the military comparison. But in the more nuanced aspect of execution is where we're going to see a problem. The funding plan demonstrated by that first plan to cut it from the smaller counties and only fund the larger gives the ability to do two things. One, you can, well, actually, it's one larger thing. If it's cut from rural counties, it's going to do damage in communities that in Oregon are traditionally Republican. And the argument would be made there, look what the federal government's doing to you, it doesn't care about you. And while doing that, we have to understand that these cuts are likely to cost lives, which is a problem with both parties in this situation, as they've decided to use Americans as pawns in their political battle. And that's wrong across the board. And that's part of the problem I have with the larger scale parties. Locally, good people. Federal level, not as much. It's going to show fatalities, but those fatalities won't be in the larger communities where there is traditional support for the government as it stands in Oregon. So it focuses the damage in a place that can be projected towards the administration while maintaining safety in the areas that don't favor the administration. And I want to be clear, what the administration is doing here at the federal level is completely wrong as well. And how this gets framed is going to have no ultimate bearing on what the consequences for these decisions will be. By making those decisions, they're killing Americans. They're prioritizing politics over American lives. Across the board, both of them. But I wanted to update folks on where the budget is at. And this particular issue pisses me off a little. So I wanted to get those thoughts out there as well. Because this is part of the problem I see at the national level, is the fight between the two parties has become so toxic, it's costing lives. So, on that cheery update, some of the good news though. Yesterday I got to meet with some commissioners about the proposal to have a chunk of income taxes come back to cities and counties. I was able to talk with, I'm connecting with some people at the League of Oregon cities as well, because we have to make sure this thing balances between counties and cities. And tomorrow I'm meeting with the co-chairs of governance and finance for the Association of Counties to talk about the proposal. So that has gained traction. It's moving forward. We've got at least one union interested. We've got more than 10 counties. But that solution will take time. And in the meantime, decisions we see coming out from higher level politicians, state and federal level, will in the meantime be costing lives. So that is, that's the state of things. I'll keep you updated as things progress. I'll be traveling tomorrow, Saturday. I'll give you the update Sunday, and we'll be back to it on Monday. Take care.